Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching the special coverage of Sansad TV on budget, and joining us right now two very special guests, Expenditure Secretary Dr. Govil and also Chief Economic Advisor Mr. Anant Nageshwaran. Sir, welcome to Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Govil, let me begin the program with you. Talking about the major announcement that FM made on the floor of the House. The fiscal deficit target is kept at 4.4% of the GDP. Of course, the capital expenditure is around 11 lakh crore rupees. Despite all the relief measures that the finance minister gave, the government stuck to the fiscal consolidation path. Your opening remarks on that, sir.
Well, this is actually a very important thing that has been done, that to keep the path of fiscal prudence. As you recall that our fiscal deficit used to be in the range of 3% to 4%. Actually, it was 4.6% just before COVID struck. After COVID struck in the year 2020-21, it went up to 9.2%. Now, at that time, the finance minister said that we will bring it down, and she said that in the year 25-26, we will bring it down below 4.5%. Now, obviously, it has to be brought down because 9.2% is not sustainable. So we are happy to say that the ministry, the finance minister, whatever she has said in the parliament earlier, we have been able to plan for that, and we have now come back to 4.4%. This will help us in building fiscal resilience, fiscal buffers, which can be used if necessary. ऐसा खुदा न खास्ता ऐसा ना हो, पर यदि कोई ज़रूरत होती है तो then we can, if need be, we can use it in future. But we have to first get to a robust fiscal situation, and this will help in getting us to a robust fiscal situation.
Absolutely, sir. Mr. CA, this is the perfect amalgamation of robust consumption, investment, providing disposable income in the hands of the people, and finally, the result on the economic growth. Your opening thoughts on budget?
I think you put it very well. So what more can we ask for? There is a fillip given to consumption. The government is continuing with its Capex spending and also with respect to overall growth outcomes. So I think this is exactly the ingredients of a very perfect, almost a perfect budget here. It gives us a lot of confidence about our own growth estimates for the next financial year. In fact, we would be willing to stick our neck out and say that now the risk is that the actual outcome turns out to be on the higher end of the range that we talked about yesterday in the economic survey. More than that, many of the measures that we spoke about and wrote about in the economic survey find direct mention in the budget allocation with respect to agriculture, MSME sector, labor-intensive manufacturing, and also attention given to tourism, footwear, toys, etc., and then the deregulation itself. So I think considering all of that, this budget, even though it doesn't speak about the global economic headwinds, it acknowledges the global environment in its own way and therefore strengthens the pillars of domestic economic growth. So in that sense, it has laid a very strong foundation for sustaining the current high growth rate in the Indian economy compared to others, not just for next to FY26, but well beyond, into all the way up to FY30 and beyond.
Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching the continuous coverage of Sansad Television on budget, and joining us right now two very special guests, Finance Secretary Mr. Pandey and BPAM Secretary Mr. Chawla. Welcome to Sansad Television and thank you so much for joining us. And Mr. Pandey, let me begin the program with you and talking about the growth projections. The economic survey talked about the growth projection that is expected to be between 6.3% to 6.8%, sir. And today's budget, how do you think it stimulates the drivers of growth?
Well, today's budget, as FM said, that we have four engines: agriculture, MSME, investments, and exports. And it touches all of the sectors. We are also having a very healthy Capex. We have a 17% projection. The increase in the BE is 17% from the RE. If you count both our direct Capex and the indirect Capex to the states, which are both in the statement, to the order of 15.68 lakh crore. And it also provides the money in the hands of the taxpayers of an order of 1 lakh crore. It simplifies procedures, it trusts the thing, it removes irritants, it wants to increase the productivity. So it is trying to do, and we want to deregulate. We want to do all that is possible to spur our potential growth. and hopefully, despite the headwinds, we would like to march forward more resolutely.
And Mr. Chawla, talking about disinvestment target, of course, the government has done away with the precedence of setting a disinvestment target, but the calculation says that it has been pegged at 47,000 crore rupees. What is the asset monetization roadmap ahead for you?
We have a composite roadmap, and it's part of a value creation strategy. Not just for the government, which is the promoter, but also for the small investor who has reposed faith in us and who has invested in public enterprises. And as part of this strategy, we follow a five-pronged approach. Essentially, we monitor the performance and give guidance to public enterprises. We ensure they make productive investments because a lot of Capex comes from the public enterprises. We communicate timely and clearly. We ensure a consistent and regular sustained flow of dividend incomes to the investors. And we follow a calibrated monetization strategy. All this has to be seen together. So you don't see and read one number as a whole. It goes together with all these things which are built into different parts of the budget. There is a dividend ambition, there's a dividend target which will further this roadmap. There is a Capex target which is built into the budget, which you just talked about. And there is a calibrated asset monetization strategy. So it's all put together.
Talking about today's budget, an inclusive budget, focusing on areas like inclusive development, focusing on women, poor, farmers, marginalized. How do you see today's budget?
No, absolutely. As you rightly said, it's a very inclusive budget and virtually touches every section of society with, of course, focus on the middle class. And it's been very thoughtfully, very sensitively drafted. And is also a reflection of Prime Minister Modi's futuristic vision. Of course, the tax rebates and the tax exemptions is something which is very popularly being described, and rightly so, very popularly discussed also. But I think there are some other aspects which will gradually percolate down and become a subject of discussion, a wider discussion. They are going to actually catch the global attention. Like, for example, in relation to the nuclear energy mission. Now, this is a kind of a provision or an announcement which could have come only from a government headed by someone like Prime Minister Modi, because he has the capacity to take path-breaking decisions, to break the taboos of the past, to take out-of-box decisions, like he did about 5 years back in case of space reform. So this is virtually going to be in the same direction. So for the first time, the Atomic Energy Act is planned to be amended in order to involve the private sector. That's a huge departure from the policy that the successive governments over the last half a century or so followed, in the belief that atomic energy or the nuclear energy was the department which was essentially meant to function behind a veil of confidentiality. But given a global scenario and India envisaging for itself a global role, we have to go by the global strategies, global parameters. Therein is this decision. Then you have also set in the same budget target of producing 100 gigawatt of nuclear energy or nuclear power by 2047. That again is a huge message across the globe. But look here, India is now no longer a follower. Yeah. It can give cues, it can give leads. It's now in a position to lay down targets, unlike what it was earlier. And also it's going to raise India's esteem, because in matters like nuclear energy, like climate, like green energy, we were not taken very seriously. The world thought that these were beyond our comprehension or our capacity. But now, I mean, we have come of age. So I think simultaneously, the same single announcement is going to address the economy. Of course, it's going to lead you to 2047, it's going to be a big stride. It is going to add to your green energy potentials. And it's also going to raise your esteem in the world and give you a wider global role. And similarly, as I said, futuristic, you have duty exemption on cobalt, on lithium scrap. So all these things are in that direction where the world is moving on, while at the same time not losing sight of the traditional ethos. Like, for example, you will have a digital repository of traditional Indian knowledge. So this is something that Prime Minister Modi has been emphasizing time in and time out repeatedly. He's been reiterating that we have to carry virasat along with vikas. So and that is our advantage, our exclusive asset compared to any other country in the West. So we have the ethos in place, and then we are trying to preserve them through digital means. So preserving tradition through digital means, that itself gives you, a kind of an amalgam which is very inspiring. That national geospatial policy is again something related to science and technology. It's going to make a huge difference in our methodologies of mapping lands, farms, and also the citizen centricity that Prime Minister keeps emphasizing in governance. The citizen will become the master of his own destiny. He can use drones, he can use space satellites to map out his field, his land, doesn't have to depend on a patwari or a revenue officer. So simultaneously, ease of business, ease of living, ease of governance, optimum use of technology, and moving towards the global targets and laying down targets in the global concerns. So I think everything has been simultaneously addressed.
Also, sir, a huge thrust to the nuclear mission of India. What kind of impact do you see? And since we're talking about sustainable development, we're talking about non-conventional sources of energy. What does it mean for the common consumer of India?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned a few moments back, the nuclear energy mission itself is going to be a huge, huge message for the rest of the world. And something which could have happened only from Prime Minister Modi, because that's exactly what he did when he was, when he decided to unlock the space sector. So it's virtually unlocking the nuclear sector, while at the same time being very mindful of the Indian concern. And as far as the solar and other part that you are mentioning, there is also, if you remember in the budget, there was a mention of green tech manufacturing, which would involve solar, which would involve e-batteries, lithium batteries, and also the nuclear energy. Because if we are moving in that direction, we have to increase our share of green source energies, which is not so right now. We largely have thermal energy and then the hydro, like that. But now the world has also begun to acknowledge that we are moving in that direction. And of course, you have 20,000 crore earmarked for SMR, small modular reactors. Yes. That's again a huge announcement. And we have an advantage which is not very often realized because it's a little technical. We already have small reactors in India, a number of them, which can be converted into modular reactors. Unlike in the West, they usually have the larger reactors, so they don't fit into the criteria, the classification of the small reactor. So I think it will be easier for us to move over to that new generation small reactors.
Point well taken, sir. And before we wrap up, there's focus on innovation, there's focus on artificial intelligence, creating center of excellence. There's also focus on deep tech startups.
Absolutely, deep tech startups, and combined with 10,000 scholarships for research through IITs, etc. This is going to form an ecosystem, a very beautiful and a very optimum ecosystem. And then the National Research Foundation already in place, about which the announcement was made in the vote of accounts, which was also part of the earlier part of the where the finance minister announced 50,000 crore, and then about 60-70% of the resource will be non-government. So all this will form an ecosystem. The education institutions, the National Research Foundation, the science institutions, the private sector coming in a big way is going to make a huge difference. And then also ease of undertaking these fellowships in research, ease of research rather, I would say, which would also lead to sustainable startups. Because easy to start a startup, but not that easy to sustain a startup. So all this will form a very beautiful and a congenial ecosystem.
साथ हैं देश के एजुकेशन मंत्री धर्मेंद्र प्रधान जी। सर, स्वागत है आपका संसद टीवी पे। कहा जाए कि इस साल का बजट इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ पर तो फोकस्ड है, लेकिन बहुत ज्यादा फोकस एजुकेशन, इनोवेशन और स्किलिंग पर भी है। चाहे डीप टेक फंड्स की बात की जाए या पीएम फेलोशिप की बात की जाए, एजुकेशन एज अ सेक्टर, एजुकेशन एज अ होल ऑफ मिनिस्ट्री अप्रोच, सर, आप इस बजट को कैसे देखते हैं?
केवल एजुकेशन नहीं, मैं इस बजट को एक फ्यूचरिस्टिक और भविष्य के लिए एक दूरदृष्टि संपन्न बजट मानता हूं। इस बजट में जो सारे विषय उल्लेख किया गया है, जो नीति सब बनाई गई है, जिसकी संकेत दिया गया है, उसमें वर्तमान में चलने वाले सारे स्कीम्स के ऊपर कुछ घोषणा किया गया है। समग्र शिक्षा, पीएम पोषण, पीएम श्री सब तो चलते रहेगा, लेकिन उसके अलावा जिस प्रकार की योजनाएं उसमें से घोषित किया गया है, इसके कारण इस सदी के जो अंतिम 50 साल रहेगा, 2047 हम सबके लिए एक लक्ष्य है।
Hello and welcome viewers to this special broadcast on Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha. With me is my colleague Manoj Verma. So we've been covering the Union Budget 2025-26 through the day today, and taxation, viewers, has been the biggest talking point of the day because it's come as a huge relief to the middle class, the taxpayers in particular. We'll try and understand the economics behind it, the implications that it is going to have, both in terms of direct taxes and indirect taxes. There've been a slew of announcements, and to decode it further, we have two special guests joining us in the studio. Pleased to welcome Mr. Ravi Agarwal, Chairman, Central Board of Direct Taxes. Next to him is Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, Chairperson, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, the CBIC. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this broadcast on Sansad TV. To you, Mr. Ravi Agarwal, first. This was a relief that the middle class had been hoping for several consecutive budgets. Finally, the government has announced and a massive relief. But help us and our viewers understand the mathematics and the economics behind it. How are the taxpayers going to benefit, if you could put a number to it? And in terms of the implications that it is going to have on the government's purse as well.
So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. The way this entire scheme would work is that it has two components. One is the change in the tax slabs, and the other is for people having income up to 12 lakhs, the rebate that is admissible to such people. Now the first component is the tax slabs. So all across, for people of all the categories, the tax slabs would be applicable, and because of the tax slabs, substantial relief is there for taxpayers of all the categories. So from 0 to 4 it is 0%, 4 to 8 it is 5%, 8 to 12 it is 10%, and so on and so forth. Up to 24 lakhs, that is income of 2 lakhs per month, the tax slab is less than 30, and then beyond that it is 30%. So for a person having an income of 12 lakhs, how does it all work? What is the mathematics? So the first step is that, okay, you calculate the tax liability as per the tax slab. So if you calculate your tax liability as per the tax slab for an income of 12 lakhs, it comes to 60,000 rupees. So then on that 60,000 you give a rebate of 60,000. So 60 minus 60 is 0. So through a rebate, the tax liability for a person having an income of 12 lakhs becomes 0. Okay. Now what happens to a person whose income is above 12 lakhs? Right? Suppose the income is 12 lakh 10,000. So whether the tax liability would be more and the take-home income, you see, would be less than 12 lakhs? No, that is not the case. So for certain income beyond 12 lakhs, the marginal relief is applicable under Section 87A of the Income Tax Act. And the marginal relief takes care of the fact that the total tax liability, if it is more than the income which is above 12 lakhs, if it is more, then only tax to the extent of that additional income is chargeable. For example, if let us say the total income of a person is 12 lakh 50,000, right? The tax liability, if you calculate as per the tax slab, would be 67,500. So naturally a question would come to mind, look, my income has increased by 50,000 only, but my tax liability is 67,500. So my take home would be less than 12 lakhs. That is not the case. So the marginal relief, by virtue of that, the tax liability of 67,500 would get reduced to 50,000, And 50,000, since income is 12,50,000, the tax liability is 50,000. So therefore, the take home would be 12 lakhs. This is so far as the non-salaried taxpayer is concerned. For a salaried taxpayer, there is an additional standard deduction of 75,000, which is available to the person. So if a salaried person has an income of 12,75,000, first you reduce the standard deduction, it becomes 12 lakhs, and then the tax liability is zero. So that's how it works.
The clarity was much needed, Manoj. You have a question on the direct tax before we move to the indirect tax.
बिल्कुल मेरा सवाल रिफॉर्म्स को लेकर है सर, क्योंकि रिफॉर्म्स टैक्स पेयर की सुविधा के लिए कई रिफॉर्म्स हमने देखे पिछले एक दशक में इस सरकार ने किए हैं, और आगे के जो संकेत हैं वो भी रिफॉर्म्स की तरफ इशारा करते हैं। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने बजट को लेकर रिफॉर्म्स को ही एक महत्वपूर्ण दिशा बताया है। इस जो बजट पेश हुआ है, रिफॉर्म्स की दृष्टि से अगर मैं बात करूं तो किस प्रकार के रिफॉर्म्स हमें और देखने को इस बजट में मिल रहे हैं? अगर मैं टीसीएस की बात करूं, टीडीएस की बात करूं, इसको लेकर भी लोगों के मन में तमाम सवाल हैं। साथ ही दो प्रॉपर्टी को लेकर भी एक बहुत अहम फैसला उभर के सामने आया है। सीनियर सिटीजन की दृष्टि से एक अहम फैसला सरकार ने लिया है। थोड़ा उनका जो अर्थतंत्र है वो क्या है?
जैसे आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा कि इस बजट में अगर हम देखें कि रिफॉर्म्स के कंटेक्स्ट में या प्रोग्रेसिव टैक्स पॉलिसी कंटेक्स्ट में या क्लैरिटी टैक्स पेयर को मिले उसके कंटेक्स्ट में कई स्टेप्स इसमें प्रपोजल्स हैं। जैसे टीडीएस के रैशनलाइजेशन की अगर हम बात करें तो उसके 4 कंपोनेंट हैं जिसको कि देखा गया है इस पूरे बजट में। पहला तो जो थ्रेशोल्ड्स हैं जिसके कि नीचे एक लिमिट के नीचे टीडीएस नहीं होगा, वो थ्रेशोल्ड्स को जो है रैशनलाइज किया गया है। दूसरा रेट्स, जो टीडीएस के रेट्स हैं उनको भी रैशनलाइज किया गया है। तीसरा कि जहाँ कुछ डीक्रिमिनलाइजेशन किया गया है, जहाँ कहीं पर प्रोसिक्यूशंस वगैरह थे जी, ऐसे केसेस में उसको प्रोसिक्यूशंस जहाँ पर ये उचित समझा गया कि यहाँ ज़रूरत नहीं है उसको हटा दिया गया। चौथी चीज़ कि जहाँ पर टैक्स पेयर को एक ओनरस रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी थी हायर रेट ऑफ टैक्स करने की, जहाँ पर उसका कोई कंट्रोल नहीं था, ऐसे प्रोविजंस को हटा दिया गया। जैसे कि अगर किसी का अगर उसको टैक्स डिडक्ट करना है और उसने अगर अपना इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न नहीं फाइल किया हुआ है तो डिडक्टर के ऊपर ऑब्लिगेशन था कि वो ज़्यादा टैक्स काटे। अब डिडक्टर को कैसे पता कि उसने रिटर्न फाइल किया है या नहीं किया है? आज नहीं किया होगा, कल कर दिया होगा, तो वहाँ पर वो रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी को उसको हटा दिया। आप अगर देखेंगे थ्रेशोल्ड में एलआरएस जहाँ 7 लाख था के ऊपर टीडीएस था, अब वहाँ पर 10 लाख कर दिया। सीनियर सिटीजन के कंटेक्स्ट में अगर देखें तो जो इंटरेस्ट 50,000 अगर बैंक अकाउंट में किसी में इंटरेस्ट अगर है तो वहाँ पर 50,000 की जगह उसको 1 लाख कर दिया गया। तो टीडीएस के ऊपर इस तरह से काफ़ी कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव एक रिव्यू किया गया है। दूसरा एक बहुत अच्छा जो इम्पॉर्टेंट इसमें जो स्टेप लिया है वो अपडेटेड रिटर्न्स का है जी। अपडेटेड रिटर्न्स के पीछे फ़िलॉसफी है, यहाँ पर माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी ने कहा ट्रस्ट फर्स्ट जी की जो फ़िलॉसफी है वो ये अपडेटेड रिटर्न्स उससे प्रेरित है। तो अभी तक अपडेटेड रिटर्न्स 2 साल के उसमें फ़ाइल कर सकते थे कि अगर 2 साल तक अगर उसको कुछ पता चले कि मैंने कुछ गलती कर रखी है तो थोड़ा सा टैक्स पे करके अपडेटेड रिटर्न कर सकता है। अब उसको बढ़ा के 4 साल कर दिया है। तो कहीं पर विभाग के पास कुछ इन्फॉर्मेशन आई, विभाग ने उसको ईमेल कर दिया, या उसके एआईएस स्टेटमेंट में कोई इन्फॉर्मेशन पता चली, या उसको वैसे कहीं पर कुछ इन्फॉर्मेशन लगा कि उसको तो दिखा देना चाहिए, विभाग को दिखाना चाहिए, तो 4 साल के अंदर उसको दिखा सकता है। अभी तक क्या था कि अगर 2 साल के बियॉन्ड करे तो उसको स्क्रूटनी होती थी, ये सब होता था। तो अब वो चीज़ ख़त्म, अपने आप टैक्स पेयर आए, टैक्स पे करे, एंड दैट्स इट। सो ये अपडेटेड रिटर्न्स के कॉन्सेप्ट को भी प्रमोट कर रहे हैं। इससे वॉलंटरी कंप्लायंस बढ़ेगी, इससे लोगों में विश्वास पैदा होगा। और 2 साल का मैं आपको अगर आंकड़ा दूं कि 2 साल में जो अपडेटेड रिटर्न का ये था 80 लाख अपडेटेड रिटर्न आया। सो विच रिफ्लेक्ट्स कि लोगों ने इसको अडॉप्ट किया है जी। और ये जो है एक तरह से इसमें इट हैज़ प्रोवाइडेड लॉट ऑफ वैल्यू टू द टैक्स पेयर। तभी 80 लाख लोग अपने आप स्वतः यहाँ पर अपडेट करने के लिए आए और उसमें 8,000 करोड़ का उन्होंने रेवेन्यू भी दिया, टैक्स भी दिया। तो ये इस फिलॉसफी पे हम चल रहे हैं कि आज की तरह एडवर्सोरियल रिजीम से हट के प्रोग्रेसिव टैक्स पॉलिसी पे लेके जाएं लोगों को, जहाँ पर वॉलंटरी कंप्लायंस हो, और उससे टैक्स भी बढ़ेगा, लोगों में विश्वास भी होगा, डर ख़त्म होगा। तो दैट इज़ द सेकंड। बाकी और जैसे कि आपने हाउस प्रॉपर्टी की बात कही, हाउस प्रॉपर्टी में किसी की अगर 2 हाउस प्रॉपर्टीज़ हैं, तो अभी जो प्रावधान था उसमें ये था कि एक में चलो वो रह रहा है, दूसरे में अगर वो नहीं रह रहा है और वो इसलिए नहीं रह रहा है कि बिकॉज एम्प्लॉयमेंट की वजह से या बिजनेस की वजह से उसको कहीं और रह रहा है, तभी जाके उसको रिलीफ मिलता था। तो अब ये उसके लिए एक डिफ़िकल्ट सिचुएशन थी। सपोज़ वो नहीं रह रहा, उसके पेरेंट्स रह रहे हैं या कोई और रह रहा है, तो वहाँ पर क्या उसको नहीं मिलेगा क्या? तो ऐसे प्रावधानों को भी हटा दिया। तो अब ये है कि रह रहा है या नहीं रह रहा है, किस वजह से रह रहा है उसका मतलब नहीं है। तो 2 प्रॉपर्टीज़ अगर उसके पास हैं तो उसको नील कर देंगे। इस तरह के कई और प्रावधान हैं।
So towards simplifying the measures, towards enhancing that mutual trust, we'll also be talking about the new income tax bill which is proposed and which is going to grab headlines starting tomorrow. But talking about the measures on the indirect tax, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, starting with the rationalization of custom tariff structure for the industrial goods. And therein the Union Budget 2025 proposes to remove 7 tariff rates, which is over and above the 7 tariff rates which were removed in 2023-24. Help us and our viewers understand the intent and the impact behind this move of the government.
In this budget announcement, 7 tariff rates have been removed. That leaves us with 8 tariff rates. The rates which have been removed are where the tariff rates are very high, quite high, and the rates are 25%, 30%, 35%, 40%, then 100%, 125%, 150%. So these are the tariff rates which have been eliminated, and the rates which were above 20% but below 70% have been merged with 20%. Right. Similarly, which were above 70% have been merged with 70%. Now the issue is that while doing this exercise, what was the rationale for retaining the remaining rates? So the rates which have been retained are, if we include 0% as a rate, so 0%, 2.5%, 5%, 7.5% and 10%. There we have provided a graded duty structure on a distinct stage of in the value chain. So the raw materials, minerals, etc., these are capped at 0% or 2.5%. The intermediate goods or the raw materials after certain processing, those have been capped at a rate of 5% or 7.5%. The capital goods have been capped at 7.5%. Finished goods are at 10%. So this fixing the item, majority of the items under these 5 rates have stabilized over a period of time. For 17 years, the goods are lying in these rates. So it is a very stable structure. We have not touched that. The rates above that, that is 15% and 20%, they are items where these items are covered under PLI or PMP programs of the Government of India for Make in India program to encourage that. So these have been retained on those rates, and certain inputs of these items have been retained wherever they are falling. The items which were above 20%, say for example of 25%, where we have brought it down to 20%, or similarly the higher rates, what we have done that to provide effective protection, we have imposed equal amount of AIDC, that is Agriculture and Infrastructure Development cess. Certain cases it is equivalent to what is reduced in BCD. In certain cases it is marginally lower than the reduction in BCD rate, tariff rate. In this exercise on certain items, like for example, there were only 4 items at 30%, but the effective rate of these items were less than 20%. So we have brought it down to 20% and effective rates remain the same. Similarly, say for example of tariff rate of 150%, there was a single item of industrial goods falling under that rate, that was laboratory chemicals, but the effective rate on that was 10% with end use condition. Only on the laboratory chemical, which is ethyl alcohol, where to circumvent any kind of using this rate for importing the ethyl alcohol, which is subject to very high rate. That rate was kept high. So there also it has been now reduced to 140%, 70% plus 70% of AIDC. Similarly, if you look into 125% rate, there is only single item on that, that is motor vehicles, that is passenger cars. So similarly, for 100% rate, there are only 3-4 items. Baggage is one of them. Then the motorcycles. Motorcycles are otherwise at 50% rate. So there was no rationale of keeping that rate. So in this exercise, we have done the cleaning up, and otherwise India was seen as having very high tariff rates. People will say that India has a 150 rate, 150% of BCD rate. So effectively,
so does that mean we'll see more of Harley Davidson, Tesla cars on our streets
no,
now?
No, it is not like that. As I mentioned, on passenger cars, the rate was 125%, and the effective rate was 70% or 110%. Those rates have been retained by imposing the differential has been by way of AIDC. So on passenger cars, the rate remains same. On motorcycles, there is marginal reduction because earlier it was 50%. On 1800 cc plus, it is now 30%, and below that, it's 40% with SWS, that is social welfare tax.
It's a welcome move. At least the new US president will not be able to characterize India as a high tariff country anymore.
And otherwise also, other simplification has also been done. There were items which were subject to assess as well as surcharge. So we have ensured that wherever there is both, and there were 82 such tariff lines. So we have exempted the surcharge on such tariff lines.
Right.
जी बिल्कुल, अगर बात इनकम टैक्स एक्ट 1961 की मैं करूं, क्योंकि इनकम टैक्स का या करों का जो सरलीकरण की तरफ रिफॉर्म्स को लेकर एक जोर सरकार का रहा है, और जो संकेत लगते हैं भविष्य में कि सरकार चाहती है कि लोग इनकम टैक्स देते समय या उस प्रक्रिया से गुजरते समय उनको एक जो भरोसे का शब्द आपने इस्तेमाल करा, उस भरोसे के साथ लोग आगे आएँ, राष्ट्र निर्माण में योगदान दें। तो मैं ये जानना आपसे चाहता हूं कि अगर बात की जाए तो वर्तमान में करीब 298 धाराएं, 23 अध्याय, भाषा इतनी क्लिष्ट है, और अगर मैं बात करूं मुकदमेबाजी की, तो जो एक विश्वास एक तरफ सरकार कह रही है अपनी तरफ से, लेकिन कहीं ना कहीं एक मैं कहूं लोगों को थोड़ी हिचक होती है कि अगर मैंने इनकम टैक्स दोबारा मैं गया तो आगे क्या, कितना उलझूंगा, तो उससे कैसे बचेगा?
आपने जैसे धाराओं की बात कही, तो मैं बताऊं आपको कि धाराएं जो हैं इतनी नहीं हैं, 800 से ज़्यादा हैं
जी
धाराएं। तो आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा, और इसीलिए माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी ने आज ये बताया भी सदन को कि अगले हफ्ते नया आयकर बिल भी लेकर आ रहे हैं, जो कि सरल होगा और इसकी भाषा सरल होगी, जो कि ईज़िली एक समझ में आए एक नॉर्मल कॉमन टैक्स पेयर को। ठीक है, जहाँ पर बहुत कॉम्प्लिकेटेड ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं तो वहाँ पर तो कॉम्प्लिकेटेड प्रोविजंस भी होंगे, लेकिन नॉर्मल जो कॉमन टैक्स पेयर है उसको भाषा समझ में आनी चाहिए। और इसी को ध्यान में रखते हुए ये पूरी एक्सरसाइज 6 महीने से की गई, और अब ये तैयार है, बिल तैयार है। तो एक तो आइडिया, एक फ़िलॉसफी ये है कि भाषा सरल हो
जी।
दूसरा कि उसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन वो जो है ऐसा हो जहाँ पर जो गैप्स हैं या जो टैक्स पेयर को प्रॉब्लम्स जहाँ जहाँ होती हैं उसको हम किस तरह से प्लग कर सकते हैं, जैसे फॉर्म्स हुए या उसकी और जो प्रक्रियाएं हैं उसको हम कैसे बेटर कर सकते हैं, कितना हम टेक्नोलॉजी इनेबल कर सकते हैं। तो अगर आप देखेंगे पिछले 5 साल में या और अगर पीछे लेके चलें 10 साल में, विभाग ने एक एडवर्सोरियल रेजीम से पार्टिसिपेटिव अप्रोच से चले हैं, कोलैबोरेटिव अप्रोच से चले हैं, इंक्लूसिव अप्रोच से चले हैं। आप अगर देखेंगे AIS एनुअल इन्फॉर्मेशन स्टेटमेंट है, तो उसमें जो भी विभाग के पास इन्फॉर्मेशन है वो टैक्स पेयर को दिखा दिया जाता है कि भाई ये इन्फॉर्मेशन है, इसके बेसिस पे आप रिटर्न अपना फाइल करिए। और लोग आ रहे हैं सामने। आज की तारीख में करीब 8.25 करोड़ लोग रिटर्न अब तो फाइल करते हैं, राइट. सो इसी ध्येय को और इसी फिलॉसफी के साथ ये नया जो बिल है उसको पेश किया जाएगा.
Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, in a major relief, what the government has also announced is complete exemption from basic customs duty, 36 life-saving drugs. And while it comes as a significant move towards addressing critical healthcare needs, how important are these steps towards rationalizing and simplifying the customs structure, towards also building a more efficient trade environment and supporting India's growth and economic needs as we walk towards realizing the goal of Viksit Bharat?
In fact, in this budget, the thrust was fourfold. One was to support the domestic manufacturing and value addition. Second was to promote exports. Third was to facilitate the trade. And fourth was to provide relief to the common people. So, as you have mentioned about that exemption given to 36 life-saving drugs or the drugs which are used in rare diseases.
Right.
So, it is to provide the relief to the patients, and these drugs have been placed in a notification where there are specified drugs already. In that list, these 36 drugs have been listed, and these will be entitled for full exemption. Apart from that, there are 6 other life-saving drugs which have been put in the category of 5% concessional rate. In addition to that, there are 37 more drugs which are under patient assistance program run by the pharma companies, where the drug is supplied free of cost by the pharma company, and these have also been exempted. So, basically that is the idea, to provide the relief to the common people. In addition to that, like for baggage, a passenger traveling outside and returning to India, on if the baggage is exceeding the free baggage allowance, there the rate earlier was 35% plus 10% over that, that was social welfare tax. So, the overall rate was 38.5%. So, that social welfare tax surcharge has now been exempted. So, it becomes 35%. Similarly, for improving the supply of critical minerals which are very essential for the economic growth of the country, these critical minerals are required for manufacture of semiconductor, renewable energy devices, of a space program. In the last budget, if you can recall, on 25 of such critical minerals, rate was reduced to nil. On 2 such critical minerals, rate was reduced to 2.5%. This year budget, the waste of 12 critical minerals has been exempted, because now under National Critical Mineral Mission, the facilities for recycling of such critical minerals will be established, and this will provide the waste for recycling, because these critical minerals are not available in the country, and we have to make available the supply of these, because it has limited supplies, and many of the mines are now already been owned by other countries. So, we have to ensure that lot of critical mineral which is already there in the devices is obtained from these devices, the waste of those devices after they run out of their life, and made available for our needs and transition to the clean energy.
Right.
जी, एक मेरा आपसे सवाल ये है कि देश की इकोनॉमी की जब हम बात करते हैं, तीव्र गति से बढ़ती हुई हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था है, जो लक्ष्य है वो दुनिया के 3 देशों में हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था आए, उसका दूर नहीं है वो लक्ष्य, लेकिन उसमें जो इनकम टैक्स या करों की जो भूमिका है उसको आप कैसे देखते हैं? क्योंकि कर आते हैं, राष्ट्र निर्माण की मैं बात करूं, बुनियादी ढांचे के निर्माण की बात की जाए, जन कल्याणकारी योजनाओं की बात की जाए, ये ऐसे अहम सेक्टर हैं जिस पे सरकार का पिछले 1 दशक में खासा जोर रहा है। और जब सरकार ने इतना बड़ा एक मैं कहूँगा रिफॉर्म कहूँगा, आज़ादी के बाद इतनी बड़ी छूट कभी किसी सरकार ने नहीं दी जितनी इस सरकार ने दी है, वित्त मंत्री निर्मला सीतारमण ने दी है। आप कैसे देखते हैं इकोनॉमी की दृष्टि से जो हमारा प्रेजेंट सिस्टम है इसका इनकम टैक्स का, उस पर आपका क्या कहना है?
तो टैक्सेशन को हमको जो है आइसोलेशन में नहीं देखना चाहिए
जी।
टैक्सेशन और इकोनॉमी दोनों साथ चलेंगे, और टैक्स जो है जब इकोनॉमी ग्रोथ होगी तो टैक्स भी एक ये प्रोडक्ट है उसका। टैक्स की ग्रोथ जो है इकॉनमी ग्रोथ का प्रोडक्ट है, उस तरह से लेके चलें। जब अगर वो टैक्स जो है वहाँ पर इट डज़ नॉट कम इन वे ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस, तो दो कंपोनेंट हुए, एक तो हुआ कि टैक्सेशन राइट टैक्स, और दूसरा जो टैक्स एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है वो हेल्प करे बिजनेस को रन करने के लिए, ऑब्स्ट्रक्शनिस्ट नहीं होना चाहिए
जी।
सो इस अप्रोच के साथ अगर हम देखें तो जिस तरह से हम पिछले 10 साल में बढ़े हैं, तो जो हमारे पूरा जो टैक्स एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन की फ़िलॉसफी चेंज हुई है वो इकॉनमिक ग्रोथ की तरफ और प्रॉम्प्ट करती है आगे इकॉनमी। जब हम विकसित भारत की बात करते हैं तो हमको किस तरह का टैक्स विभाग चाहिए, हमको किस तरह से टैक्स पे सर्विसेज हमको किस तरह की चाहिए। टैक्स तो इम्पॉर्टेंट है, दैट्स एसेंशियल कंपोनेंट, सब सरकार चलनी है तो टैक्स जो है चाहिए, बट वो टैक्स किस तरह से कलेक्ट किया जाए और लोगों को इनकरेज किया जाए टैक्स पे करने के लिए। जब वो काम करेंगे, इकॉनमी जब ग्रोथ होगी, बिजनेस होगा, एक्टिविटी होगी, तो टैक्स भी आएगा। द ओनली थिंग इज़ कि वो टैक्स जब वो पार्टिसिपेट करना चाहे तो उसके लिए हम इतना सहूलियत कर दें जिससे उसको पार्टिसिपेट करने में कोई दिक्कत ना आए, तो उसी दिशा में सब चल रहे हैं। तो अगर मैं ये कहूँ कि अगर ओवरऑल फिलॉसफी अप्रोच की मैं अगर बात करूँ तो प्रूडेंट अप्रोच, मैं अगर एक टर्म कहता हूँ प्रूडेंट अप्रोच जो है वो टैक्स डिपार्टमेंट की होनी चाहिए, और वो उस तरफ हम लोग आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। प्रूडेंट का मतलब क्या है कि प्रोएक्टिव होना चाहिए, पी से प्रोएक्टिव, कि कोई भी अगर इशू आएंगे, आज अगर 9 करोड़ अगर टैक्स पेयर अगर रिटर्न फाइल कर रहा है तो इशू कुछ ना कुछ तो आएगा, लेकिन चैलेंज ये है कि जैसे ही कोई इशू आए प्रोएक्टिवली हम उसको रिजॉल्व कर दें। तो आज हम उस तरफ अग्रसर हैं, प्रोएक्टिव अप्रोच है। दूसरा आर इज़ रूल बेस्ड अप्रोच, कि हमारे पास रूल्स होने चाहिए और उस रूल के हिसाब से जो है हमको काम करना है, तो ये अप्रोच शुरू किया है। तीसरा यूज़र फ्रेंडली, कि हमारी वेबसाइट हुई, हमारे जो जिस तरह से हम अपनी टैक्स पेयर सर्विसेज हम प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं वो बेटर हों। तो ये डी इज़ डेटा ड्रिवन, कि जितना हमारे पास डेटा आया हमने टैक्स पेयर को दिखाया, उसने जो है उस पर कंप्लायंस किया तो एक तरफ टैक्स भी आया और दूसरी तरफ हमने टैक्स पेयर सर्विसेज दिया। ई इज़ इनेबलिंग एनवायरनमेंट, कि टैक्स पेयर जो है हमारा भागीदार है
जी,
हम उसको अलग नहीं देख रहे, भागीदार है वो हमारा। और एन नॉन इंट्रूसिव, कि कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है कि मुझे जो है उसको इंट्रूसिव अप्रोच रखने की। मैं अगर जो है टैक्स पेयर को अगर ईमेल भी करता हूँ, उसको जो है अगर सहूलियत दे देता हूँ तो अपने आप कंप्लाई करेगा। अपडेटेड रिटर्न जो है इसका एक उदाहरण है जी। और टी इज़ टेक्नोलॉजी, जितनी आप टेक्नोलॉजी और ट्रांसपेरेंसी लाएंगे उतना बेटर होगा एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन। तो अगर इस तरह की अप्रोच से अगर टैक्स डिपार्टमेंट जिसकी तरफ हम लोग बढ़ रहे हैं, और आपकी अगर ये देखें इस बजट में भी जो स्टेप्स लिए गए हैं अलग अलग एरियाज़ में लिए गए हैं, चाहे हम प्रेजम्पटिव टैक्स की बात करें तो प्रेजम्पटिव टैक्स लेकर आए इसमें, जिसमें कि अगर जैसे इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स इंडस्ट्री में अगर किसी को सर्विसेज और टेक्नोलॉजी प्रोवाइड करना है तो बाहर का कोई अगर आ रहा है तो उसको हमने प्रेजम्पटिव टैक्स दिया, यानी क्लैरिटी है। अगर उसको क्लैरिटी होगी तो पार्टिसिपेशन भी होगा उसका, राइट। इसी तरह से बाकी और अभी ये IFSC के कंटेक्स्ट में बाहर का जो अगर कहीं पर इन्वेस्टमेंट आ रहा है तो उसको अप्रोच को वो कर रहे हैं। सो अलग अलग एरियाज़ में इस तरह का यहाँ पर अप्रोच कर रहे हैं जिससे कि इकोनॉमी में की ग्रोथ में हम लोग भागीदार बने।
So I think rationalization, reducing compliance burden, ease of doing business, all of these areas have been covered in the budget, especially when it comes to taxation. The budget has fulfilled the wish list of the middle class taxpayers. At the same time, also addressed concerns of the stakeholders which were raised regarding the customs tariff structure during the pre-budget consultations. I recall we had a discussion with the concerned stakeholders, and especially when it came to the life-saving drugs, the pharma industry and the critical minerals area. So those concerns have also been addressed to a large extent in this budget. So that having been said, we'll reiterate what the Prime Minister said. It's a growth-oriented budget. It's a people's budget which has something for everyone across the country. So that having been said, we'll have to wind up the program. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of the broadcast. Manoj, thank you once again to both our guests for joining us on this telecast and sharing your insights on the critical aspects related to taxation in the budget 25-26. Thank you very much, viewers, as well, to you for your time. Good night.